Good afternoon. Are we working? Are we live? I'm Bill Furlow, the Program Director for the IoT Solutions World Congress. And I wanted to introduce our distinguished panel today. We have Dave Lafferty, Steve Mustard, Claudio Lima, and Alejandro Aliaga. And they are going to talk about generative AI security issues. So I know everybody's been eating Mexican food, and you're probably a little bit sleepy. So let's clap our hands and get them up on the stage, okay?
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. I'm Dave Lafferty. I'll be chairing the session today, and I've asked each of the panelists to introduce themselves because I find that a lot more effective than just reading a bio. So I'm Dave Lafferty. I'm in the energy sector based in Houston, Texas. I help bring digital products into the energy sector. Alex?
Hi, my name is Alejandro Aliaga. I'm working as a CTO on ONTINET. I have more than 25 years of experience in cybersecurity, trying to understand the risks of the companies and make a translator in between the business and technology.
I'm Claudio Lima. I'm from Texas, and I'm working building a generative AI model. That's part of what we do at Microbrains. Basically, we build models for industrial use.
And I'm Steve Mustard, also from Texas. I'm actually a control system engineer, but I also work in energy like Dave. And one of the things we do is look at new technology and how we can deploy that in control systems environments. And one of those technologies is, of course, AI. So it's going to be an interesting discussion.
Great, thanks so much. I thought I'd take a little different approach for this panel. There's been lots of discussion at the conference today about generative AI and the vulnerabilities around it. And so those are great sessions, so I didn't see any sense in covering more of that. But what I wanted to do was to sort of look at some of the issues around generative AI and then see how the cybersecurity community could help address some of those issues. So rather than looking at it as a vulnerability, take a look at it as what could we bring to the table to help some of the issues. The four issues that I'd like to tease out is the first one is around the ethical concerns. So there's things like deepfakes. There's creating misleading or just flat out wrong kind of content, things like that. So what are some of the things that we could do around that? There's also, from an ethical concern, maybe even the right to use. The concept that I scan all of Spotify, train my model, and now I'm generating new music based on that training, but yet I'm using the original work content of all those artists. Is that fair or not? So we'll address that first one. The second one is quality control, and that's sort of around how do we help ensure that the results that we're getting out of generative AI is in fact good. So is it accurate? Is it coherent? Is it extrapolating things that it shouldn't extrapolate? Those things. So we'll talk about methods around that. The third one is about bias and fairness, and bias isn't necessarily a bad thing in a model. For example, I might build a large language model to help a mechanic repair a turbine or a pump. And I might want to bias the model towards my internal practices because I feel that I've been working on that for 100 years. My company has a lot of knowledge in that space, and maybe I want to bias it towards our internal practices versus maybe the manufacturer's recommendations. So we'll talk about bias and fairness. And then finally is the intellectual property. It's a huge issue around just not only the consumption and the right to use, but also once that content is generated, how do we identify it as AI generated, and who owns that work product? You know, is it Google because it was their model that did it, or is it the content that was ingested? So I'm not sure we'll have answers for all these things, but definitely I thought we'd sort of tease that out. So let's jump into the first one, is the ethical concerns, things like deepfakes, the creation of misleading information. So ideas around how we might address that. Who would like to go first?
You first.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. This is definitely one of my concerns from a control systems point of view, is we want to use generative AI to help operators and technicians be more effective. We want to help control systems be more effective, but we can't do that if we can't trust the information that the generative AI system is providing us. And we're going to talk more about the bias later, but the first part, I think one of the things that we can learn from the security world is we have ways to authenticate and identify information, for instance, certificates. I think that can be one thing we could talk about, how we might use those. I hate to mention the word blockchain, but one of the features of blockchain is its immutability. And when we're talking about identifying where something comes from and whether it's been modified at some point along the way, that is one of the things that blockchain could help us with. Because I think there's two things. One is where does the information come from? And then the second thing is, how is the information being changed in some way through the process till at the point it gets to you. So those are the integrity part, I think, is just as important as the source of the information. So again, like you say, I don't have solutions, but I think we have some foundational parts that we could use. And I guess it's just a question of how we can introduce those into that world. So.
Yeah, so we have to think about how this started. So most of the models have been trained by the public data we have out there, Wikipedia, books, and so. I think we are reaching a point that there will be no more real data. So I think the AI is going to create synthetic data. So everything we are building now through video, photos, etc., is going to go back to the internet, right? So this will be our synthetic data, and the AI is going to come back and take that content and retrain again. So what we see is that this model will become a vanilla model, which means that there will be no real human touch, right? So we'll be ending the era of real human content. And there is what we call MAD, M-A-D, model autophagy disorder. That's not, so that's kind of a disorder that's going to come with LLM, large language model, when you have more synthetic, distorted content than the one that we really want. So MAD is going to come, and when you reach the maximum amount of content that's no more, then you will have to go to your private content. So your real data could be your sensor data from IoT, real enterprise data, the one that's proprietary. Because the public ones, this will be under this MAD idea, and they'll be mostly synthetic. And then you see more of this deepfake retrofeeding back to the machine, and this is going to create a cycle. That's what we can expect in the future.
Yeah, I think the root problem is that you say that the information that the models are using is public information that they scrapped from internet, and then the information that the AI creates as a synthetic information comes again to internet. So in these days that we are trying to share everything, in every moment we share images, we share information, we try to be the first on the social networks, trying to put more information. There is a root problem that is we can not understand what information comes from a real source and what information comes from a artificial intelligence source. So to address the problem, it's not easy. Yeah, maybe we can start using certificates or watermarks into the information that the artificial intelligence creates, but this is very complicated because you can use public models, but you can use private models. So what is the difference? Or anyone needs to accept to put a watermark in their private model. So this is a discussion that don't have a clear answer. So it's complicated, but we need to try to create models or create regulations or whatever to try to make a watermark or whatever that can identify this information is real and this information is created from artificial intelligence. It's a synthetic information because we can see every day, we can see on the media, more media are using information that is not real. It's created and also is created by an artificial intelligence, and the main problem is an hallucination from the artificial intelligence. So they are publishing information that is not real. So this is very complicated to address, but we need to start trying to identify how to identify the real information and how to make something to try to distinguish in between the artificial intelligence.
So following on from that, Dave, one of the analogies that we see already, even before this, is news articles, for instance, or even sports reports that are actually generated automatically just based on certain pieces of data that they read. So they generate an actual article, makes it look like it's written by someone, and people read that. And the thing I'm wondering about is there's no way of a human reading that to know whether it was machine generated or not. So I was going to ask Claudio, you talked about those vanilla models. How do you see people being able to recognize when something comes from a vanilla model versus a private?
Yeah, I think if you go back 1 year ago, I think it was possible to recognize, but I think it's become more and more difficult to, because the model has been trained to interpret the human language, so it's going to be perfect on that. I think it will be very tough to do that.
Right.
For example, I was making an experiment with my colleagues on a social network. I create an image from artificial intelligence, and they don't recognize that the image is not real. So maybe one of the things that we need to think about is how to train people, how to explain that there is no a perfect image. You can see, for example, some details. In my case, my watch was on the left, on the not real image, but I'm using my watch on the right. So many details that we can see when the image, but the problem we have nowadays is that the image is not completely perfect, but in the future could be perfect. So if we are starting training people, if we are training to have not to see everything and accept that everything that we see is real, I think this is the first step that we need to do. It's not a technological issue at the very beginning. We need to start making training people, training organizations that there is some small details that we can identify to see that it's real or not.
Great, great. So that sort of leads right into the second area I'd like to tease out, which is the quality control. I guess for a little bit of background, the generative AI world sort of leaning towards a three-tier models these days. You have the vanilla models that live in the public area. They ingest all sorts of, well, what's ever out on the public internet, and you don't really have a lot of control on what it ingests or doesn't ingest, and things are sort of weighted the same, whether they're real or not. An example is, medical reports that have long been discredited are ingested and weighted the same as ones that are real. The second type of model is it lives behind the corporate firewall, but all the employees have access to it. This would be things for HR policies or other things like that. You don't want them ingesting stuff that's on the public internet, but everything that's in the corporate network is sort of fair game. And then you have private networks, which should be, let's say you want to create a generative AI for equipment maintenance, and that you want to be very careful because you are what you eat, right? Whatever you ingest becomes part of that model, so you would very purposely. So I'd like to sort of tease out how do we sort of use things like that to control the quality of the accuracy of the generative output.
Maybe I think if we are using public models, that they are using information from internet to train the models, and we have more opportunities to not to have accurate information. So the answer is to use a private model? Maybe yes, or maybe not, because we cannot put doors over internet, because all the persons that work in our organization need to use internet, and to have a private model into our organization is not easy technically, and it's not cheaper. So maybe we need to, again, I think my posture is not starting from the technological point. It's starting from if we are generating reports, we need to have a double verification. So we don't need to write the report using the artificial intelligence and, okay, it's fine. We need to supervise the report, and also we need to contrast information with other colleagues. So it's like in a scientific manner that they write an article, and someone on the community read again the article and say, okay, this is fine, this is correct, and we can publish this article. So maybe the main problem to address this issue is to, again, training people to change maybe our processes internally on the company, and then, of course, using the technology in order to, for example, try to train our models with our information, that the information has more accuracy than the information that the model can obtain from internet, for example. So maybe the first step or the starting point is to make a mix in between the procedures and also to try to train the private model with internal information. And also could be using a firewall or whatever, but this is not the answer, because if I have a firewall in my company, I can use my personal computer to try to find information using a public model. So we cannot, this is not efficient.
Today, one third of the companies in the world are using generative AI, right? So 1/3. But only 50% has put some mitigation practice to address this issue. So, which means that most of the companies, they are not aware of what we are talking about here. If you think about if you are a corporation, a big corporation, if you are an institution, banking, insurance company, a big corporation, so most likely your employees are using that ChatGPT now, right? So, and there are policies that they have to put on the AI governance. I think the key what is all the companies, they have to create the AI governance policy. Number one, put some practice that the employee cannot use document that's internal to the company to submit to a public LLM or generative AI. So number one policy. right? You have to put some directive and even software to control that if they upload. So there are some alerts that the cybersecurity team, they have to come and basically put some blockage on that particular doc. You cannot do that upload. But you can do in your internal system. So if you develop a product with Microsoft or this known cloud computing company, so that then you are authorized to use because you already have been, the model have been already trained on that particular company policy. That's the only way you can do. You cannot go outside, right? There are policies that blocks you. Then you go just inside. So that's the only way to control that, is to create a governance for AI. Because most of the apps you use today, most likely your data is being leaked. So you upload your picture of your family picture to tweak a little bit. You don't know what they are doing with your picture, right? So there is no policy and control of this company. I know a bunch of them. So they don't even know. I ask, what's the confidential information policy for my picture that I'm uploading to change? There is none. So there are multiple AI app companies coming and deploy these very cool ideas, and people are using that, and they are throw lots of potential sensitive data, and we don't know what they are doing. So you have to have this cloud compute, very secure, scalable governance policy that create that. Otherwise, you cannot guarantee that your data is being secured.
So I agree. I think the policy is important, but I do agree that what Alejandro said is that even before that, we have to have this cultural understanding, because people are going to try and find their way around policies always. And I was also thinking that, you know, the culture with AI at the moment with organizations, especially leadership, is how can we save money by getting rid of people and replacing them with AI? And actually what they really should be thinking is, how can we make sure that we manage the risks associated with AI by keeping people in the loop? And not just that, but actually recognizing that AI helps people do their work better, not necessarily replacing people, because I think that's a road that is a really bad direction to go in terms of all of these security issues. If you start to say we're going to remove more and more humans from decision making, then you're going to inevitably end up where you don't know how the decision was made, and it may be a bad decision. So I think, like you said, that's where you have to start with this, is we've been allowed to embrace this technology without having any training in how we should responsibly use it, and we have to get that in place now, because it's going to be too late soon.
Yeah, maybe I agree with you, of course, but Claudio said that the key, in my opinion, the key is AI governance. We need to go, when we start using a new technology in our organization, we try to understand the technology, the risk of the technology, and we try to govern this technology. Why we are not starting doing this with artificial intelligence? So we need to start identifying the risks that we have, identifying the issues that we need to address. We need to create new policies, for example, new procedures, or whatever. So maybe we need to start thinking first to adopt new technology, because in my opinion, again, I think most people are making the discussion about technology and not around how to governance this kind of technology. That I think is very important. A good start point.
I think you've really, you've touched on a very important point, and that is, if you think of the original cybersecurity policies that were put into place, and then people either consciously or unconsciously, went around them. They clicked on that email they shouldn't have clicked on, or whatever. Sounds like a generative AI is sort of the same thing. You have to have policies in place, but then there's some training of behavior, changing of behavior that we need to probably do. The C-suite is generally not aware of that when their employees put stuff out onto the public LLMs, their IP is out there for everyone to use. And it's like, maybe you should have some policy around it, but then maybe learn from the cybersecurity, community on how to train users to not do that.
Right, and I think, again, learning from the cybersecurity community, the way you come up with the policies and procedures, which are controls, is by doing a risk assessment. I think you mentioned that, let's understand what our risks are, then we understand what controls we need to put in place, whether they're technical or procedural, to manage the risk. But if you just start doing it and learn what the risks are along the way, you don't have the controls, right?
I think whoever uses ChatGPT today, I think the best thing you can do, if you haven't done yet, most of people they have done, is to go to your setting and then go to data control and disable that data control. So it means that you stop GPT to use your data, right? So you go to setting and disable data control. But I don't trust that. So it's just a way for them to say, hey, I'm not sharing your data, no. But never trust them. I mean, that's honestly. I work with lots of doctors, so we develop products for doctors. So doctors they are the one who handle the most sensitive information because that's patient data. So they have the personal identifying information, PHI, PII, they have GDPR, they have HIPAA. And the doctors are experimental with GPT. They are uploading patient record on GPT and say, hey, give me a summary. I know people even upload blood exam, right? And it comes out completely different because ChatGPT hallucinate and the result comes completely different. So, and they don't know how to do because there are options. You can download open source in your laptop, but number one issue, they told me that my laptop is old. I have an old Mac, I cannot download. The model is not powerful for me to download. I need more memory, so they have an issue. So they can go to the cloud, Amazon, Azure, they can buy that, but sometimes it's expensive, sometimes they don't know how to do. So, and usually you can do that with open source. So there are, people want to use, but they don't know how to navigate through this complex of how can I use this important documentation, my patient record, I want to summaries, analysis, then I can try GPT, and then basically you are in trouble because you are sharing information and you are not supposed to do that.
Great, great. So it sounds like there's a lot the generative AI community can learn from the cyber folks. We probably made all the mistakes, so we can help say, don't do that. The next area I'd like to touch on is bias and fairness, and not to talk down to the community, but in large language models, there's parameters, and then those parameters are hooked together in a neural network with weights between those parameters, which say this is highly related to the other. So this is a parameter. Those are 4 words in a sentence, so they would be highly, related. They might be associated with a chapter called What is Generative AI, which is in a book called What is AI, right? So there's, semantically, related. And that is what bias is, because you're saying these parameters are given more weight than other parameters. And so a romantic novel might not have any weights towards the subject of AI, for example. So bias isn't necessarily, it's usually used in a bad term, but usually what it means is giving the biases such that the generative AI, the generated product is more in line with what you're expecting, right? And all there. So I'd like to chat a little bit about how we could help with bias in the sense of sort of controlling those weights, and then also just in fairness of is it building that semantic map, that knowledge graph correctly or not.
Well, let me start again, because this is again something from my deterministic point of view that it's really important. Is firstly, I want to know how something came up with the answer it came up with, so that I can trust it. And two, I want to know if that method has changed as well. So like if the weightings change, then the result might change. And that might be okay, but it might not be okay. It might have been manipulated by someone intentionally, or it might have changed for some other reason, and I get a different result. So the first thing that I think we've got to grapple with is how, and again, as a user, you might not understand the details of the neural networks and the knowledge graphs that are behind the model. So you need a way that you can explain it to the lay person, how is this configured, and then be able to have some assurance that it hasn't been changed along the way as well. So those are part of the problem. And then I think the other thing is, you mentioned as an example, you might bias a particular way of responding to something based on your experience. But the funny thing is that might not actually be the best answer, right? That just because you did it for 100 years might not be the best way to do it. But then you've got to persuade people to do it differently. And that's hard if you're telling people that it's coming from an AI tool, and then they're going to not trust it. And so even with the best possible technical solution, we also have to find a way to get people to trust this. Otherwise, it's never going to be used to benefit people, right? So I don't have any answers, but they're the problems, right?
So I think the ideal AI system is the one that, as you said, is a mix between probabilistic and deterministic. So the probabilistic is the generative AI. So maybe 30% of a neuro-linguistically probabilistic model that creates things. And then here is fact validated by machine learning in the rule-based model. So and then he can orchestrate multiple heavy fixed deterministic models. So I think that's the ideal solution. Because if you rely on only probabilistic model, so they are going to give whatever you ask. So they are going always to please you. So there is no way for you to fact check that unless you are a subject matter expert. So if you know exactly your subject, then you can question the AI, right? But if you are not just throwing a question, you never know if the answer is going to be right or wrong. So that's kind of critical. I think bias is good, as Dave suggests, because the generic model basically is not, you do whatever you want. But if you want to go to enterprise model, then you want to be extremely biased on your documentation. So the weights are heavily trained on the data set you have. So it only talks to that data set. So it doesn't go outside that box. So you put boundaries, and that's how you create what we call RAG, Retrieval Augmented Reality, Augmented Generation, RAG. So RAG is the way for kind of ground that model with your knowledge base. But if you throw lots of knowledge base, so if you put maybe 100 papers, it's going to hallucinate in your own RAG. So you have to be very careful what you want to do. The idea is less is more. Not if you have 1,000 control database, the AI is going to hallucinate over that 1,000 database, right? So you have to be very specialized model. Otherwise, it's going to hallucinate on the probabilistic of that multiple knowledge you have. And then you have the fine-tuning. Fine-tuning is when you train the AI to behave like you wish. Like say, we have a model that we create to be the cardiologist AI. So I train that model to behave and talk and speak like a cardiologist, right? So that's how you fine-tune that. So if you ask any other question, sorry, I don't know, I'm a cardiologist. Then you ground the model based on what you want. Then you give them knowledge. That's the RAG. So basically, RAG give papers, whatever medical record, only on the cardiology subject. That's the best way for you to construct this model. But again, never do 100% generative AI. Always ground the model with good rule-based deterministic information and models.
Yeah, totally agree with you. In my opinion, is a mix between a large model with a lot of information, with combining this with a RAG model, and also why not using AI agents? For example, you say about the doctors. In medicine, we have doctors that are specialists on cardiologists. So why we don't have an AI agent that is a specialist on this? So they have information about only the specialists. So combining large language models with RAG information and also this kind of agents that has only a short list of information could be, and also making this fine-tuning that you said, could be a solution. But nowadays, we cannot trust on everything that comes from artificial intelligence. So again, we need to make fact-check into the information that we receive, and also working in this kind of fine-tuning to train again the artificial intelligence. And you say, I totally agree with you that less is better than have more information, a large database with a lot of information, because with models that has more information, start saying hallucinations and information that is not real. So less is better. So maybe small agents with a small database with information, combining with RAG in other cases, could be a good solution.
Boy, that's great. It sounds like standard cybersecurity measures to prevent a model from consuming outside of its domain is a good start. So again, it sounds like there's a lot to be learned from the cyber folks. Well, the last area I want to touch on, and this one's going to be sort of hard, is the whole intellectual property. So there's two aspects of it. There's the ingestion side of it, which we talked a little bit on the fairness side, the ethics of consuming somebody else's work and then claiming it as yours, right? So the sort of the cliff notes of the old days of college days where I didn't have to read the book, I just bought the cliff notes. But sort of that aspect of it, but also from a generative aspect of it, these models are not creating new information, they're just combining existing information in new and novel ways. So so who owns that IP? You know, if it writes some Python code, I don't know. Does Google own it? You don't know. So I'd like to tease that out on what are some of the lessons we can learn from the cyber security community to address the intellectual, property issue.
Yeah, that's a really difficult one. I think it's not just the intellectual property, but the again, trusting where the information comes from. So is it the cardiologist's recommendation that you do this thing, or is it some other thing that's either intentionally or unintentionally being provided to you? So I think, there's definitely the intellectual property issue is a big one, and I think if you ask OpenAI and others, I think they say it's their intellectual property, maybe, and sure, they'll pay people something like Spotify pays artists a tiny amount of money for their contribution, and so everybody's happy with that, right? If you remember, they're the ones who used Scarlett Johansson's voice to create something without her permission, and then it created a big storm, and then they said, "Oh, we didn't mean to do that," and that's going to be a problem. So, yeah, right. So yeah, again, I guess we have to protect that intellectual property. That's the first thing. So protect the original intellectual property. So that it can be used if it needs to be, but it's used in a almost fair use way, right? So whatever you define things like fair use, there is you create a standard you don't create a standard so people can't ever read it. You create it so people can do things with it, but you want it to be used fairly. You don't want someone to create a new standard for free for somebody by basing it on your standard, or you don't want someone to create a training course that's like your training course, but you do want that training course to help other people. So there has to be some kind of fair use element, but then I guess once you, the new, I'm going to call it new, even though it's maybe not new, but not original content, but it's a new form of content. As you say, that still has some intellectual property, and so that has to be attributed somewhere. Now, I wonder whether, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but we have software bill of materials and hardware bill of materials, which are a way of identifying the contents or the recipe of a piece of software or a piece of hardware. And that is a way of, at the moment, identifying how you can find the vulnerabilities and find the products that have those vulnerabilities. But maybe a form of software bill of materials or hardware bill of materials could help with identifying the content that's used to create the new content. You know, with this, the original source of the content that you've got comes from all these other sources, and so you can keep tracing it all the way back.
I've noticed the Google searches now, their AI summary actually has footnotes for the sources, so you can go in and actually check the sources, and it's useful to sort of get the creative juices going, but then you're on your own to sort of make the final work product. But there was such a backlash of where did that come from? That there's dozens of footnotes of I use this, and this. So,
Right. Yeah.
So, as you said, the good news that the AI now is listing reference, right? You do a search, it comes with the reference. Bad news that sometimes never true. You have to check and then double check. So always do your Google search just to make sure that is the right information. Don't trust now the AI. It's going to be better now, later. But the bad news that whatever you have in terms of IP has already been consumed by AI. So whatever is in this big internet, books, everything is being taken and is already part of the weight model of the big AI, GPT 4, 5, and the future 5. So that's why Elon Musk bought X, the Twitter, because there are so much content there. That's his training the X AI model based on Twitter, chats and file. It's so rich on that because there is no other source. Facebook has, Meta is using Facebook posts and LinkedIn. Everything is already there, right? So there is no, there is no way to control. And then back to what we are talking about, all this topic, I think you said human is important to validate things, right? But I'm afraid to say that human is going to play some role at some point, but then at this point there will be so much information, so much innovation that we cannot control. It will be very difficult for people, government to control that generation of content. We had to build AI to control AI. So that's the only way. So we had to build AI expert system trained on a particular control idea for IP that AI is going to monitor those IP, not human. Human cannot do that because the innovation so at fast speed, we cannot do that, right? So I think it would be bots and AI doing that.
Yeah, totally agree with you, but I think it's a good, it's time to start talking about AI regulations. So, because it's impossible to control all information that is generated by artificial intelligence, but we need to start not trying to control all of the information that the AI generate, but we need to try to control how they ingest information, and also trying to define the rules for the new technologies in order to make this kind of artificial intelligence that control the rest of the artificial intelligence, like a policeman, we can say it. So in Europe, we are trying to start with this because we are trying to regulate the artificial intelligence, but this cannot be a problem for the technology. I explain. So we need to make the balance in between how to improve the technology and how to regulate it. Because if we regulate a lot the artificial intelligence, maybe we can go into a problem because we cannot improve the technology because someone cannot make experiments or whatever. So, and the opposite part, we can see China, for example, that there is no regulation, everything is okay. So we need to make a balance in between. We need to regulate how to ingest information, how to present information, how to use the artificial intelligence, and how to improve the technology, making or facilitating the investigation for the companies and also for the scientists.
Great. It sounds like a lot to be learned from the EU's data privacy policies. Well,
just one, I think what you said is extremely important because we put policies, human policies, right? But eventually the AI has to control that. As I said, AI has to control. But if you give too much autonomy to the AI, we would go to another different problem, exactly. Right? So we don't know what the AI will be doing because he's in fast mode, and no human can control that fast mode operation AI. So it has to be lots of directives, like you see the sci-fi movies that don't kill human, don't do that. So you have to put AI directive, and it has to be in a blockchain layer. To no one can, not even the AI, most likely, maybe post-quantum cryptography can go and destroy that cryptography, the directive from the blockchain, but no one can go and change the directive. Mm-hmm. So every time we write a code with AI software, you put the directive on your code. Right? Do some this, do that, don't do. So there's a kind of directive you have to use, but sometimes you may give too much autonomy, then you're going to lose control, and that's another big problem.
Great. Well, as promised, I think we generated more questions and answers. And to that, the rest of the session, I would like the audience, if there's any questions for the panel. Do we have an MC? I guess we don't. I will be the MC. Steve had to leave for the next chat. He's up for another speaker.
Oh, thank you so much. I have just observations maybe, having working on this field for quite some time. One is the price performance of the model. So many customers have been doing the POC with Gemini, with Mistral, with OpenAI. When the cost comes, oh my God. So I need to retrench my effort to something else. And my thought is, if you see the evolutions of this generative AI, it essentially came from academia, social media, search engines, all good. The problems they're trying to solve is good, but those are the problems enterprise does not see. Enterprise sees models in terms of maintainability, productionizability, integration point of view, right? So enterprise has a different kind of tech. And to that extent, enterprise needs special models with much less tokens, maybe 32 billion tokens as opposed to 3 trillion tokens, so that the price performance could be as good as GPT-4 with 1/8 of the cost. So these are the two things I personally feel need to balance out for the enterprise, because enterprise is different game than the consumer stuff. Another thing you talked about, I loved a lot actually, like having a crypto, so that AI agents cannot go nuts, right? AI agents cannot go nuts. And other things, I think you're talking about synthetic data generation, differential, what is that called? Differential noises you deliberately create, right, in the model itself. Those things are kind of there pretty much. But in my humble opinion, that AI agents we talk about, the models are still maybe 60, 70% has the capability of reasoning. So we have to have a guardrail if we have to have an agent-based solution. If we know damn well that it has to work 100% of the time, because that's what the enterprise needs, and 100% perfect 24/7, then only I can have AI agents. Otherwise, no, right? I just want to validate my thoughts. Thank you.
Yes, so these are very good points, and I agree. And as part of I have another talk at 5:20. I'll talk about only enterprise model. But I think enterprise is going to adopt that. I mean, there is a research that for every $1 you invest in generative AI, you get $3.70 in return of investment. So I think you lose money if you're not doing that. So that's the message, right? But you have to do it right? So doing right means that you have to see what you need. Sometimes you don't need a big model, you just need a very small, as we discussed, very specialized, very well trained, and then maybe a 70B parameters. I think that's ideal size, maybe even 500B. That's kind of if you use DeepSeek, that's fine. I mean, people are afraid of using DeepSeek, but as long as you take this DeepSeek, that the Chinese model, and put in your private cloud, it works as a private model. It doesn't talk externally, right? So that's right. And there are other, the Llama and other options. But I think enterprise is going to find that it's costly to access this public model. They charge per token. That's become very costly, particularly if you use a lot. But it depends on the application. Sometimes justify, right? So justifies you to pay that cloud. But trying to instantiate in your own private, sometimes just pay the cloud cost, and then AI is free, and then you download and train. I think that's the ideal condition.
In a way, the prompting happens to be just English. No, it's not English. Prompting means you need to have broadband data science knowledge, scripting knowledge, domain knowledge, and it should be like pretty big. And because of lack of prompting understanding, the cost goes up like crazy.
Yes, I think you just mentioned prompting. I think prompt engineering is a skill, is an art, it's more than science. You have to have a thinking process that has to be very critical thinking. You just throw the prompt, it's not going to solve. You have to interact, layers of interaction and refinement. And you have to be the expert to validate that. Otherwise, the AI is going to tell you lots of untruths, and he's going to hallucinate, and you are going to say, oh, this is the truth. No, it's not the right information. I think, prompting is I think that's, we are going in prompt engineering world now, so lots of people who does manual tasks, they need to do creative tasks now, just to prompt and get the answer from the AI.
Yeah, just a small point. We are trying to use currently general AI to do everything. So maybe we need to start thinking that we need to start using a small artificial intelligence that only has one task. So if in the real life we have workers that has only one task in our company, that is a specialist in whatever, and they don't need to know everything of the company. So you are talking about the number of tokens. So maybe we can reduce this kind of artificial intelligence using a special artificial that do everything that we need. For example, programming code in Python, for example. And we don't need for this to use a large model with a lot of billions of tokens. So maybe we need to start using the AI in the right way. So using for one specific thing.
Your point's well taken. I advise the C-suite a lot on generative AI, and they almost always tell me about some sort of trick they've done. I've taken this poem and translated it into Latin or whatever, and it's like, well, that'll make you a lot of money. So I sit down and say, how can you reduce your cost of sales? How can you reduce your cost of goods using these tools? And then suddenly it changes the conversation where suddenly maybe those charges do make sense, or maybe more importantly, maybe those charges don't make sense and the whole thing doesn't make sense. So going back to understanding the business problem that the generative AI can solve is how you start. Then how you do it becomes secondary, but you always keep that business goal in mind and what the value proposition of solving that is, and then that puts the boundaries around the whole adoption. Any other? Oh,
Hello. Firstly, thank you for what you spoke. Really got me a lot curious, but also a lot of answers about the topic. And my biggest question about it is regarding open source models, on how which should be the global governance strategy to regulate on it, on models that could be replicated and used by people without regulation, and what the governments or companies should do about it.
So as I mentioned, open source is the way to go if you don't want to touch the big providers. You have to train, take the open source, make sure that's a reliable one. There are maybe a handful of those that's reliable one. And then you do your own fine-tuning and then do the RAG for the knowledge base. And then the question that where you put it, the model, right? So you can put in your personal computer, if you have enough capacity of memory, that's one way. Or you can put in your private cloud. There are two ways. You can hire a GPU from a trusted private company, or you can deploy in AWS in Azure Cloud, right? So in this case, you have to upload, create like you do in your typical enterprise mode, create an instance, put out the security, authentication, control, and deploy the model there, and then you give access to all your employees. So I think that's the only way to do that, because this big clouding company, they give you lots of protection. They are HIPAA control, they have security control, they have all the policy mechanisms behind that. And even if you do medical records, a patient record, so there is one form that you have to sign, they can sign for you that the model is not being used for that particular for different type of use. Yeah, so I think rely on this traditional cloud is the way to go, because then it gives you this corporate AI governance that I mentioned, right? That's what big companies are doing now. So unlikely they'll go outside and use the open AI or this public model. They'll stay within their own private train using open source. I think that's the way I see.
Yeah, regarding the security controls, we can learn a lot from the past. In cybersecurity, we can make a business impact analysis, so we can understand the risk to put new technologies in our business, and also how to put security controls on top in order to prevent the risk that we identify in this analysis. So if we are using this kind of lessons that we learned in the past in cybersecurity, when we are trying to adopt the artificial intelligence, we can start making security controls in order to prevent leaks of private information, and also the use of this artificial intelligence. Also, if we are using, for example, open source models, deploy it in a private cloud, or deploy it in our system. So we can learn from the cybersecurity in the past how to work with this new technology, because the key is the artificial intelligence governance, maybe.
great, thanks. Well, I see we're just about out of time. So what I'd like you to do is thank my panelists